Greetings, fellow Earthlings. Welcome to this tiny garage. It seems like every time I have a problem figuring something out on this car, one of you guys sends me a message or a comment that helps me figure it out. I don't know how you do it. It's kind of like magic, but I really appreciate it. I wanted to say thank you to Rio Padak in Tartu, Estonia. I know, Tartu, Estonia. Let's all learn where Tartu, Estonia is right now. It's over there by Finland, who knew? And take a look at this. This is downtown Tartu. How beautiful is that? So I did want to say Terra to Rio, Edach, and also to Mattioso Santo Pieretti in Quebec, Canada. Merci d'avoir regard. And then close by, just up the road in California, we've got Douglas Thurl, Lulu, hey guys, and also Peter Watson. I really appreciate your support. Thank you so much. Now, last week, we took a look at steps 1 through 16 of how to start getting the engine out of this car. So this week, call me crazy, we're going to start with step 17. Next up, we have to disconnect the power steering clips. They're on the top right of the engine bay. You just unclip that little plastic clip there and it comes off. That's kind of how it opens and closes there. Pretty stiff, but it works. And then inside that, around the two hoses, is this little rubber grommet that separates the hoses and allows that clip to grab onto both of them simultaneously. And then there's exactly that same thing, but a little further back, that holds onto the same two hoses. According to the Bentley manual, you're now supposed to counter hold these hoses. The first one I'm working on here has a 19mm on both sides, but it was really difficult with the space there just to get enough oomph on them to get them to break free. And so, of course, more WD-40. Then I had to go on the smaller side. That is two 15mm. Again, it says to counter hold them both. Even with pushing them against the intake manifold, and here I'm trying a crowbar type method that I made up on the spot, and that didn't work at all. In the end, I did wave the flag of surrender temporarily, at least. I read online in some forums that it can be better just to leave those connected until you drop the engine a little bit, and then it becomes much easier to get a grip on them and loosen them. So that's what I'm going to do. Step 18 is the fuel tank vent. This was like one of the easiest things to do. You just push in those spring-loaded tabs at the top and the bottom, and it opens up very easy, as simple as it looks. Then we had the brake booster vacuum line. In the book, it didn't have any of this plastic stuff on it. I don't know if that is normal. I don't know if this was leaking perhaps and someone put that on there. But if you uncover that using, of course, the plastic trim tool, I was gradually able to rip and strip it off. It was kind of like a rubbery plastic that might have been painted on there. Then using that same trim tool, I was able to wedge out that little plastic collar that goes into that hose and stops this plastic ring from being pushed down. So the next step then is to push that black plastic ring down that goes around this hose and pull up on the hose. I needed 3 hands. You could feel every time you got it right that it would slip out a little bit more and more. And in the end, it did work. Then we're on to the Serpentine Belt. Now, the Serpentine Belt is the belt that joins all the auxiliaries, they're called, to the crankshaft. Now, I did use my fancy wire hanger to hold up the oil filler tube. And then right behind that oil filler tube, you can see me. I'm putting the direction of the belt on there in case we end up reusing that belt. It's called a serpentine belt because of the way it snakes around the engine bay, not completely unlike this particular snake here. So that's the crankshaft pulley. That really is the engine. Then this is the alternator that makes power if you want to have electric windows and that kind of stuff and charge the battery that's making the spark in the engine. Then if you want to have air conditioning, you have to have an air conditioning compressor. Of course, if you would like to have power steering in your car, you need to have a power steering pump. And then down the bottom there, you can run the engine without these things, but if you want the engine to stay cool, you do need a water pump as well, and that's the one down the bottom. Now the pulleys, as it turns out, are really quite simple. That top one is the upper idler pulley. It's an idler pulley because it doesn't do anything other than rotate. It's just guiding that serpentine belt around in the direction it needs to go. Then below that we have the lower idler pulley. Same deal, it's just a pulley bolted onto the crankcase that helps direct the serpentine belt. The one we're interested in is the tensioner pulley that's on some kind of spring-loaded arm. And if you twist on that with a 24mm socket, it will loosen up the belt and you're able to very easily get that belt off of all the other pulleys and auxiliaries. To get the belt itself away from the car was a little tougher. At the very bottom by the pulley for the water pump, there was a very small gap, and so I found it better to go under the car and then to turn the belt at a particular angle that it could go through that little slot. After that, it was easy to get it out. Looking at the condition of the belt, there is really no cracking that I can see. The edges aren't frayed or any kind of damage that's obvious on it. Looks pretty good, really. I don't plan on actually reusing it if the engine does go together well, but it is worth hanging on to. Another thing that's not mentioned in this book is the presence of this temperature probe that's on the plastic intake manifold behind the AC compressor. Now, if you can remove that, which is pretty easy, just pull on it and take out the little rubber grommet that holds it in by pulling it to the side. That makes it easier to get to the third bolt on the back of the AC compressor. A little more WD-40 for persuasion on these bolts. They ended up not being too bad, but the third one in the back was a little scary from the first time I heard about it. So here I'm using a 13mm regular old wrench with a big hammer to get it going. Once it was going, I used a ratcheting wrench to do most of the work there. Still wasn't very easy to get it out past those hoses, so I decided to just let it hang there for a bit and come back. For the other bolt in the front, I used a deep socket 13mm. That was pretty straightforward. Then to be able to see the third one in the back, I did use my borescope. I did also use that to help guide getting that 6mm extension onto the top of that bolt. From there, it was pretty easy. Then using that magnetic telescoping picker-upper device, I was able to get that third bolt out, and I felt very lucky because that did seem scary. In the book it says, then remove AC compressor, but the more I wiggled and wiggled, it seemed obvious that something was stopping it in the back. Now the book makes no mention of this, but this car does have a fuel cooler, which is connected to the AC compressor, which cools the fuel as it goes into the engine. I didn't know such a thing even existed. Looking online, it seems that that's supposed to be on the turbo car. This is not a turbo car. In reality, you can't remove the AC compressor without disconnecting the fuel cooler. It wasn't that bad once I knew it existed. It was two 14mm nuts on, I presume, an in and an out for this cooler. I did put whiteout on one of those inputs just to make sure I knew when I put it back together which one was which. With the AC compressor removed, it's easy to see those two 14mm nuts that the fuel cooler was connected with. In the back of the air conditioning compressor was this old-fashioned blade connector, one little electrical connector, not bad. In the book, it does say just to lean the air compressor on the back of the car. I'm using an old floor mat here so it doesn't damage anything. We're leaving the air conditioning compressor connected to the car and with the car so that we don't run the risk of releasing any of the refrigerant into the atmosphere unexpectedly. You're supposed to have proper equipment to deal with that and dispose of those chemicals properly. The plan then is to fix the engine, put it back into the car, and then put the AC compressor back on. If it doesn't work, then we'll deal with it then. But for now, it's simpler just to leave it with the car and leave the whole system connected. Next up are these two engine wiring harness connectors. They simply have these rotating knobs on them. You rotate them to the left a little bit and they come undone and come off. Some of the easiest things to disconnect on this car. Again, in the book, it doesn't mention removing the smog pump, but I looked online and it says in a lot of different forums that removing the fuel lines, which is coming next, is much easier if you just get this smog pump out of the way. It was very easy. It was 3 10mm nuts and or bolts, a combination there. And then this connector that was on the back. And that was pretty much it. With the smog pump out of the way, really it is much easier to see these fuel lines. So here's the front one that did have a 19mm on it, again with the big hammer to encourage that to get going. Once you got it loose, it was very easy to turn, just very limited space. I was prepared for some fuel to come out, but really just not very much fuel, a few drops, and that was it. Once the front one was out of the way, the rear one was pretty easy to see again. That one was just a 17mm wrench, pretty similar situation. Once I got them off, I did cover them with the fingers of a glove, just to try to keep any kind of particulates from getting in there and making this already damaged engine any worse than it is. Now that the AC compressor is out of the way, we can gain easy access to this upper coolant hose. As with the other ones, it's using this 7mm socket to get that circlip off. Here's an insight into the technique I've been using to get these hoses off. I would love to know how the professionals do it. I start off by wedging in this plastic trim tool to get some space. Then I put the straw of the WD-40 in there and squirt some WD-40. As soon as you do that, you can kind of feel it loosening a little bit. Then I come back with the plastic trim tool and dig it out as much as I can, put some more WD-40 in there, and then in this case, that was it. It just slid off. Unfortunately, that is all we have time for this week. Thank you very much for watching. Till next time.